Well, just in, new marching orders for the Pentagon. Defense Secretary Leon Panetta outlining a new strategy just an hour or so ago for America's armed forces, calling for major cuts and shifting resources to help balance a shrinking budget. Let's talk about these plans with Van Hipp, a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army and Chairman of American Defense International. So under the plans, and again, the Defense Secretary and the President didn't give a lot of specifics, but we understand part of the plan is to take the Army down from 570,000 active duty personnel to about 490,000. Your thoughts about that?
John, that's one of the things that concerns me most. Every new Secretary of Defense, be they Republican or Democrat, I think, historically always, they mean well, and they talk to these think tank experts who've never served a day in the military, who tell them we can win a war with basically with air power and special forces, and we don't need that grunt on the ground. But history tells us every time we need the grunt on the ground to win the war, to finish the job. That's what we saw in Iraq. That's why the surge worked, because we got that grunt on the ground to finish the job. So that the cut in the Army, taking the Army below 500,000, concerns me most. The other thing that really concerns me, they talked today about the $489 billion in defense cuts over 10 years. This is what President Obama had talked about for some time. They didn't talk about the $500 billion with the sequester that will be imposed on January 2013 if Congress doesn't act this year. Let me tell you the significance of that. Right now, with what the Obama administration is doing, it means that we no longer can fight two military regional conflicts simultaneously. With these $489 billion in cuts, we can probably fight one war. If Congress doesn't act on the sequester, and we don't restore those cuts, I don't see how we can fight one war successfully.
The president promised in his opening remarks at the Pentagon that we would be able to take on whatever challenges lie ahead. Listen to that, and let me get your reaction on the other side.
So yes, our military will be leaner, but the world must know the United States is going to maintain our military superiority with armed forces that are agile, flexible, and ready for the full range of contingencies and threats.
The full range of contingencies and threats. Do you agree?
John, 2 points here. Number one, I do think the President and Secretary Panetta's increased engagement in the Asia-Pacific region makes a great deal of sense with the increased cyber threat coming out of China, biological threats in that part of the world. We need to work more with allies like Australia and Singapore. They are right. However, there seemed to be a disconnect between Secretary Panetta and President Obama. And let me tell you what I'm talking about. Secretary Panetta talked about those $500 billion in cuts, mandatory cuts, and said and urged Congress to act. He talked about that. President Obama says he only has one major item legislatively on his agenda this year, and that's the payroll extension tax cuts. President Obama needs to listen to Secretary Panetta and add the $500 billion in mandatory cuts that are coming so that we can be able to fight at least one war and win here for the United States.
Right, and one of the criticisms, and we just have a short time to address this, but when we were fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan at the same time, one of the criticisms is that our forces were making multiple tours and having their deployments extended. It seems kind of an odd time to be shrinking the size of the force.
John, that's a very good point. In particular, our National Guard forces, our reserve forces, as well as active duty, 4 and 5 combat tours with some of them. Look, I'm all for cutting fat out of the Pentagon budget.
Sure.
But we are no longer cutting fat. We are cutting muscle and bone out of our defense budget. And I think it's important this election year to remember why we have a Pentagon and Defense Department. If you go back and look at our Constitution, I would argue the number one responsibility and role of the federal government is to provide for the national security of the American people.
Van Hipp, the former Secretary of the Army, thank you.
Thank you.
And happening now, we'll be right back.